I don't know. I just feel like I'm constantly being like gaslit. Like the world's punishing me for daring to ask why we choose to live like this, and that's why I got sent away in college. Like I couldn't understand any of it. Like why was I doing quizzes during a pandemic? Dissecting Shakespeare while another video of someone who looks like me dies with no justice comes out. No one cares until February. Or they wave around the same corpse from when I was a kid and tell me to act like them. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if it's a clever way of asking me to die. They're just so full of contradictions. They say we don't support violence. From their blood diamonds ours. It can very comfortably excuse the violence of poverty, arrest, eviction, genocide, torture, throw people in jail who disagree with them, poison populations and let them die, but the minute someone throws a brick, I'm sorry. This is just all so maddening. No, but I enjoy talking to you. Fine, but you're doing it with me. Do you ever feel like you're going mad? Of course you do. Odds are if you're watching this video, you live in a part of the world we call the West. And you know what they say about Westerners. The Western mind is a plague among humanity that will lead to our annihilation if we don't dispose of his ways of reasoning, logic, and organizing the world. So madness. The video is about madness because maybe a world where it's reasonable to enslave, genocide, and poison populations has very little room to decide what's unreasonable. Maybe a world where slavery has been a norm has very little room to say what's abnormal. So that's why we're talking about madness, and the climax will be us talking about blackness. So you have to be patient, or you could skip to it, I suppose. You don't really need to watch Act 1 to understand Act 2, but that would make me extremely sad, so please don't do that. We're gonna get into all the philosophers and whatnot, and by the end of this video, you will feel like you have a college degree and have gone mad without losing your mind. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that was foreshadowing. Before that though, thank you for the massive support on Penetrated Male, which is the official title of the bottom video. I decided I'll make a follow-up video on tops at 100k subs. Or sooner, I don't know, I'm quite indecisive anyway. Grab your wine, my lecture starts now. In Crazy Like Us, Ethan Waters asserts that American intervention in other people's cultures is what's making them ill, or as they put it, the virus is us. And I had to create a decision of putting like the US because United States, so it's like, you see, please subscribe. Starting with anorexia, Dr. Singh Lee documents how at one point, Chinese women's anorexia wasn't the one we know now, the American version that centers around body image. What I mean is, they all lack the fear of getting fat that most Western anorexics have, and what the DSM at the time highlighted as the main symptom of the disorder. He also said many of his patients described their anorexia as more of a blockage, like they couldn't swallow or were just never hungry. According to Dr. Singh Lee, fat phobia wasn't really prevalent in Chinese culture, so it wouldn't make much sense for his patients to struggle with this. He also notes that at one point, eating disorders in general were very rare in Hong Kong. He became a little bit obsessed with anorexia, so he decided to do a little experiment. Dr. Singh Lee would decide to starve himself. He wanted to know how his patients could survive so long with how little they were eating. And what's really weird is, after a substantial period of time, he would start to feel better. His hunger had become almost like a drug. He described it as having this monk-like pride and the control he had over his body. But then people got all concerned about his health, so he had to stop. But he did feel that his research and his patients' experiences were something integral to anorexic diagnosis and research. The mystery of why anorexia arose in China still remains. Some have argued it's because of the Western influence, but this is not an accepted take. Whether because Western influence or because not enough evidence to really make a case for it is up to you. I can't really say either way. But now a case where that inflammatory statement I said in the beginning has a bit more weight. The Western reaction to the Sri Lankan tsunami. After the Sri Lankan tsunami, the West has sent trauma specialists and whatever to help the people deal with the aftermath. The thing about the West is, it tends to think it knows better than you. Deborah Wentz, executive director of the New Jersey Association for Mental Health, had this to say about the Sri Lankan health system. They mentioned this one story where this guy told this kid that his parents were dead, right? Now the kid had already been told that his parents had moved away by relatives. Fuck that, I guess. Told the kid his parents were dead because he needed to face reality or whatever. What they didn't consider is maybe the thought of his parents moving away was exactly what was keeping him mentally healthy. Really not that different than what we do in the West. How we tell kids someone has moved on, looking down on us, on to a better place. They liken this to how we go on missionary trips to try to replace their God with ours. Sri Lankans were able to emotionally recover from the tragedy because they had a culture more equipped to deal with tragedy. Or in layman's terms, the Sri Lankans were just built like that. They were just built like that. Another part that I found most interesting, differences in schizophrenia across the globe. What's pointed out in this book is how schizophrenia is very much influenced by your environment. For example, they say how in America people have delusions of the CIA beaming microwave beams into their tooth fillings or whatever the fuck. But you can't have that delusion unless you know about the CIA, microwaves, and beaming technology. And to support that, there's also evidence that hearing a persecuting voice of God, that delusion that many schizophrenics have, is more common in Judeo-Christian cultures, but less common in Islam, Hindu, and Buddhist cultures. And these aren't static, they even change over time in areas. They say in Austria, for example, the delusions of grandeur are increasing, but delusional guilt is decreasing for some reason. The prevalence rate also changes from place to place. People living in the United States and Europe tend to have the disease more than those living in the country or suburbs, they say. Men living in densely populated areas in Sweden are at a 68% chance higher of admittance for psychosis, and women 77% higher. But to wrap this part up, let's talk about the two studies they talk about as well. The World Health Organization found that those living in India, Nigeria, and Colombia have a less severe form of schizophrenia than those living in the United States, Denmark, or Taiwan, whereas 40% of schizophrenics living in industrialized nations were judged over time to be severely impaired. They say only 24% of patients in poorer countries were similarly disabled, and they point out the irony of it all, how the places of the world with the most money, the most resources and whatnot, produce the worst results for schizophrenic patients. But now to end with something that may infuriate you. Have you heard of affluenza? Not influenza, affluenza. Affluenza is the wealthy man's insanity plea. Meet Ethan Couch. Some of the older people in my audience might recognize this story, but I had the misfortune of learning about it researching for this video. Ethan Couch killed 4 people in a drunk driving accident and would spend no time in jail for it because his lawyer got him off with the defense that he had affluenza, which made him unable to understand the consequences of his actions. While not an officially recognized disorder, it was used to save Ethan Couch from a life in prison. Until this case, affluenza was more known as like a trait or an idea, not an actual disorder. Yet it worked. Ethan Couch will spend no time for killing Holly Boyles, Shelby Boyles, Breonna Mitchell, and Brian Jennings. This case is one in a long line for me, and I'm sure you as well. A law seemed to be made for the poor, not the rich. And the term affluenza is only real in a way it points to the disconnect the wealthy have with the rest of the world, i.e. a lack of empathy. And that's all I have on that. We unfortunately have to talk about fascism now.